Resident Evil 4 is a game that requires no introduction whatsoever. It's officially considered to be one of the best video games ever to be created, as well as being considered the pioneer of the over-the-shoulder genre of gaming. We all also know about the story behind the development of the game. Hideki Kamiya directed Resident Evil 2 and was charged with directing Resident Evil 4. His version deviated too much, and he ended up making his own video game titled Devil May Cry. We all also know about the Hookman demo that was scrapped, which offered a more psychological approach to the gameplay, but ultimately this was abandoned too because of hardware limitations. Until finally we got what we all know nowadays as the legendary Resident Evil 4. So much so, in fact, you can get it on pretty much any console there is out there. I've known this game ever since I was a child. And knowing where I come from, I didn't really have the fanciest of consoles or games. The fact that I was able to play this as a child just speaks volumes of how great this game is. Now, as a child, I was never able to even start the game. The game would absolutely terrify me. But all of that ended on November of 2019, the month I finally, after many years, was able to finish Resident Evil 4 for the first time. And now, I am here to give you my opinion and analysis, and hopefully give you a little bit more insight into how this game obtained the position of one of the greatest video games of all time. Before starting, I also want to give a really quick shout out to an amazing YouTuber that most of you probably already know, who gives amazing retrospectives about two of my favorite franchises in gaming. I am of course talking about Foxgate. He gives his own retrospective about RE4, which I really recommend watching. Now, I also want to mention that I played the original GameCube version. This version has a lot of differences with other re-releases for other consoles and HD remakes. Obviously, I will spoil RE4, but I doubt there's anyone who does not know what RE4 is about. And now that we got all that stuff out of the way, let's finally begin.
Resident Evil 4.
Let's start from the very beginning of the game. We start the game with a narration of the events that happen in Resident Evil 2, and soon after we get the reveal that it's Leon Kennedy himself narrating the events. Leon is on his way to an unknown village in the countryside of Spain for his very first mission as an agent for the US government. He is tasked with rescuing the president's daughter from the hands of a cult in the village. Pretty big first task if you ask me. The most impactful thing about the game is the sudden start. If you're a previous Resident Evil fan, there's nothing too weird here until you get to the controls. You get past a bridge, get near the village and park in front of a house. Then, the player finally gets control of Leon. But what is this? Third person? This is probably one of the most controversial decisions in Resident Evil history. That's right, Resident Evil 4 completely ditches the fixed camera angles and goes for a more third-person shooter action game approach. Now keep in mind, I will be talking about this change a lot throughout the video and how it affects the horror aspect of the game, because trust me, even though you can roundhouse kick and suplex people in the game is scary. The main thing to be said about this kind of gameplay, however, is that just like in previous entries, you cannot move while aiming your gun, which makes for pretty stressful and scary situations as the game presents you with more challenging scenarios. Now, after this introduction, we go up to a path, but the road is blocked by a truck. The only logical option is to go into the house, and in here we meet our very first enemy, the Ganados. Ganado is the Spanish word for livestock or cattle, and after quickly taking care of this guy by either shooting him or slashing his eyes with our knife, we get a call and then we get a cutscene. The truck blocking our path suddenly turns on and the current people we got here in are gone, thrown down to the river. After this, we obviously do the logical option of jumping outside of the window as the prompt shows up. Yeah, you heard me right. This is another controversial decision that RE4 implements, prompts and quick time events. These are the kind of things that you either like or dislike about the game, and to me, it didn't really pose much of a bother until some QTEs that happened not too long after this. So anyway, as I was saying, after jumping outside the window we meet more of the Ganados, and here is an interesting bit of information about them. This part of the game specifically terrified me as a kid. Not only do the Ganados sound extremely terrifying and threatening, but they are also extremely unpredictable if you compare them to the typical zombies of the previous games. The Ganados don't just slowly walk, they can also run after you, alert other Ganados, or even duck or sidestep to evade your shots. As a kid, I would always try to run to the bridge to try and escape, but seeing the Ganados chasing after me in the distance would always make me crap my pants. Suffice to say, it was pretty challenging playing this as a little kid, which is why I never got around to finishing it. After dealing with these Ganados, we can finally access the path towards the village. In here we can find a small kind of cottage, in which we find our first breakable object, which is a box, and our very first typewriter. But wait, how am I gonna save without ink ribbons? Well, don't worry, because Resident Evil 4 throws the ink ribbons away and grants you infinite saves. Now this doesn't bother me nearly as much, however the game also possesses checkpoint systems, which entirely defeats the point of having a save room in my opinion. On past Resident Evil games, saving your progress wasn't a choice you made lightly. You couldn't save as much as you wanted, because not only are your saves limited, you also need to take into account that if you die, you will return to that save file, so you had to save in very strategic situations. So back then, finding a typewriter and saving your progress was a conscious choice you had to make. On Resident Evil 4, saving your progress is something you do if you want to turn off the console pretty much. Gone is the dread and anxiety of not knowing whether or not you should use that ink ribbon to save, because chances are the game will do it for you, and if you die, well, you will just return to the start of the room or the start of the area, and that's pretty much it. So this is an aspect that I highly disliked about the game, because it really doesn't differentiate it from just having a save prompt in the menu of the game. However, if you see this from the point of view of a shooter, it works pretty well. Moving up towards the road, we find many weird signs that aren't all that welcoming. We will also find the dog. I find the use of the dog here amazing because it teaches you about the existence of the bear traps, which are impossible to spot if you aren't conscious about them, given the angle of the camera and the fact that they kind of mix with the environment if you're not paying attention. And you also get a companion if you decide to free him with the prompt. He will come later on to help you. Advancing forward to the village section, this is the part of the game that I would never be able to pass as a kid. I honestly was just really terrified of this. When you finally reach the village, you will find one of your drivers being burned alive as the people in the farm go about their daily work life as normal. You will also get a call giving you a quick tutorial on your controls, which is always appreciated. So right now, you're not only alone in this place that you're completely unfamiliar with, but if it wasn't entirely obvious before, now you completely and absolutely know that there is something wrong here, and the people in this place are insane, and it's highly doubtful you would find a single sane person to help or guide you. All that is left is taking that first step and walking into the wolf's den to do your job. You can approach this situation any way you want. You can shoot at them from a distance, or try to sneak in and surprise them, or just run around the entire place and alert everyone. Now, if you play the game, you know exactly how this sequence plays out. As I was playing this for the first time after years, I found out exactly what was going on here. See, Resident Evil 4 is a very divisive game in the Resident Evil community. The game introduces many great ideas for the future, but the future games also take a single aspect of Resident Evil 4 and leave the other aspects completely outside, and I personally think that's why the more hardcore survival horror fans highly disliked 5 and 6, because even if they are good games, they are not scary in any way, and are more of a fun action game with a lot of gore. Meanwhile, the previous Resident Evil games were about avoiding combat whenever possible, managing your resources, and praying to God there won't be a fucking tyrant waiting around that corner. Resident Evil 4 instead chooses to encourage fighting in a way, which is pretty weird, right? But allow me to explain. Resident Evil 4 is the first mainline game to introduce currency and buying resources. Later along in the game, you meet up with a certain someone who will sell and buy you things for pesetas, which is a currency that was used in Spain since 1868 until 1999. Pesetas are found inside boxes or barrels, or when killing enemies, alongside grenades, ammo, or treasures. By rewarding the player with ammunition and resources when killing enemies, you are encouraging the player to engage in combat to gain more and more resources and currency. This currency used to buy more powerful weapons and upgrades to in turn make the game much easier, and while this takes away the scary factor by empowering the player, it is not a bad thing per se. Seeing it from the perspective of a shooter game, this works well for giving the player a feeling of earning weapons and upgrades, and later on the enemies reflect this by becoming much more hard to fight. All of this combined makes for a combat that rewards the player for killing enemies and gaining more currency out of it, rather than, like previous games, exploring the area and solving puzzles, which in turn rewards the player with brand new powerful weapons, but with very scarce ammunition, which doesn't happen in 4 at all. So then the logical answer would be that Resident Evil 4 is not scary in the slightest, right? However, a single moment I experienced in my playthrough made me change my mind completely about it. It is after you encounter Vitores Mendez when accessing the village area once again, your second encounter with the chainsaw Ganado Dr. Salvador. In this moment, I was using my shotgun to headshot him and keep him on the ground stunned. However, I was running low on ammo, so naturally I had to reload, but since I didn't yet finish reloading, he got up and got closer to me. I began panicking until finally Leon finished reloading, and just a second away from getting decapitated, I managed to shoot him back, finally killing him. So there I got my answer. Resident Evil 4's combat isn't scary in the sense that the enemies are an enormous threat and you should avoid them if possible, but rather it shifts the horror of the previous games into a completely different thing, but still using the same formula. Resident Evil 4's combat is about being in a stressfully overwhelming situation that it induces panic. The panic of not being able to reload on time, the panic of having an enemy suddenly run up to you, or the panic of being surrounded by enemies and not know what to do, which happens a lot in this game and it never stops being scary. The choices in previous games are whether or not you should avoid the enemy to keep your resources such as ammo and health. In this game, the choice shifts into something else. Do you want to kill the enemies in your way so you can gain pesetas and possibly ammunition? Or play it safe and avoid them? Avoiding them isn't going to be easy, and neither is killing them. You may run out of ammo, which has happened to me, and you may risk dying in the process. I mentioned before the existence of treasures. Treasures in this game are found all throughout the areas you start. You can find different treasures by shooting certain glowing areas or objects, find them inside boxes, or by killing enemies. These treasures give you certain pesetas by themselves, but combined their prices spike up immensely, with the highest prices being around 40,000 pesetas. And speaking of treasures, you'd think some treasures are attainable by doing puzzles, right? Well, let me talk a bit about RE4's puzzles. To my surprise and slight disappointment, Resident Evil 4 has the easiest and most unchallenging puzzles I've encountered in a video game. Now, this isn't entirely a bad thing, it is just a bad thing for me, because I enjoy a good puzzle that makes me retrace my steps and scratch my head a little bit. Resident Evil 4 also is the most linear game in the main entries of RE at the time it came out, so retracing your steps is useless in this game. Not only are there areas that are inaccessible once you get out of them, but whenever you can access a previous zone, there's usually nothing else to do there. Resident Evil 4 is a linear game through and through, and the puzzles in the game reflect this. Every puzzle is something you do on the spot and requires no previous or future items to solve. There may be one or two, like the door to the church, but the rest of the puzzles require only items you can find in the same exact zone you're in, or they're puzzles that somehow change the environment, like lowering some boxes into the water so you can jump, stopping the waterfall, draining the water so you can advance forward, or moving a cart to get explosives so you can remove a boulder in your way. Or you could just punch the boulder. But yes, if you're not a fan of games that are linear and have easy to solve puzzles, then perhaps RE4 is not the game for you. This may be one of the reasons people kind of dislike RE4 and the games that came after it. For me, it proved to be slightly annoying, but in the end, I consider them fun little puzzles, like the one at the graveyard, turning around the insignia on the door, or the light puzzle inside the church. They're fun, but they're not as rewarding as the longer puzzles from previous games, which require lots of backtracking, but also greater rewards for successfully completing them. The prompts and quick time events are something many people heavily disliked about this game, many blaming these choices, saying they are why RE shifted into a more action type of game. I for one don't really mind them. I really enjoy the QTEs when an enemy grabs you, for example. It really emulates the feeling of wanting an enemy to get off of you, and really adds to the frenetic and panic-inducing combat that I talked about. The ones that I hate are possibly the smashing A QTEs, you know, the boulder sequences and the lake or the giant sequence. These are QTEs that require the player to smash A to run fast or to slash fast, and are honestly not really fun and boring, and oftentimes tiresome. Plus, the boulder sequence requires the player to input 2 buttons after running fast to dodge the boulder, and the window to do this is extremely small. In the GameCube version, you either need to press A and B or left and right triggers to dodge it, so every time not only do I have a small window to press the correct buttons, but I also have no way to know which ones they're gonna be. I personally think that by merely changing the camera position for these sequences, they become much more panic-inducing and much more enjoyable. Simply changing the camera perspective to be on top of the boulder so you can both see how close it is to you and how close you are from the wall makes it much better, so then you can time your inputs correctly to effectively dodge the boulder safely. The slashing QTEs, I kind of understand what they were going for, but I still find that climbing on top of a giant to slash away at the plaga inside of it to be a little too much. That's something I haven't explained yet, right? I have mentioned the AI of these enemies to be more intelligent than the ones in previous games, and that is because the enemies on these games are not zombies. They are normal humans that have become hosts to las plagas being the Spanish word for the plagues, which is exactly what this organism does. It spreads by laying eggs inside bodies and then grows to control the host completely, effectively infecting the entire population of the countryside. You find this out as you play the game, and it's the explanation of why every single person in the village wants to kill you. They are under the control of Lord Sadler, which is the main antagonist and the one controlling every plaga through his own cult called Los Iluminados, which means the Enlightened. This also explains why these people aren't just mindless zombies and therefore are more intelligent and able to wield weapons and speak, which is the reason the Ganados are way scarier to me than normal zombies. Sure, at some point they may become normal people, and by the end of the game there's some that even have firearms and armor, which is kind of ridiculous. But they're still scary because they're able to communicate and you know their intent. They are everywhere and they are intelligent. They can lay traps to catch you or plan strategies like surrounding you and overwhelming you. They are out to get you. They know you're here and they won't stop until they eliminate you. There are many types of plagas in this game, and once the plagas are introduced in a later section, the game becomes much harder and much more overwhelming, which is what I mentioned earlier is the source of fear in the game. The main type of plagas are the ones that have blades on them. These can slash away at Leon even when the Ganado is on the floor, and can slash away at long range. They deal a lot of damage, and if there's more than one, it is highly recommended that you take care of them. The next type of plaga is one that is highly dangerous when in close range. This type of plaga have a sort of mouth that if too close to Leon can decapitate him by eating his head. The next type of plaga is one found later on in the castle section. These plagas can leave the host body when the host is dead and will jump at Leon trying to kill him. This type of plaga are very dangerous if you don't know how they work. It should be noted that every plaga's weakness are flash grenades. If an enemy has his plaga outside of his body, throwing a flash grenade will take care of them immediately. These are your most valuable asset. They also provide a great stun period in which you can easily kick at least 3 enemies before the effect wears off, or gives you enough time to run away or clear the path. However, the Ganados aren't the only enemy types in this game. Aside from boss fights like Vitores Mendez, Ramon Salazar, Krauser, the U3, and Sadler, there's also many other enemy types along with the Ganados. The most common is Dr. Salvador, which is a normal Ganado, only this one wears a bag on his face and wields a chainsaw. He is also much more resilient than other Ganados and can take many shotgun shells to kill. The logical next one is introduced in the castle. They are called Garrador. Garrador isn't a Spanish word, however garra is. Garra means claw. The translators probably thought clawer means garrador, because of the Spanish suffix dor. However, this is nothing more than a mistake since the word does not exist. The garrador is a really tough enemy. This enemy will not answer to any shots taken to the body and is completely blind. However, running around or shooting your gun will alert it and it will immediately unsheath its claws and start slashing, or will do a clean thrust forward, who can either damage you critically or decapitate you and kill you instantly. The only weak spot is on its back, so the best strategy is to get up close to its back slowly and shoot with your most powerful weapon, or to lure it into a wall so it can get stuck and shoot it until it dies. In isolation, like in the first encounter, this enemy is pretty easy to overcome, if you have the tools. However, in later stages, this enemy is paired with more ganados or with another garrador, which makes dodging them while walking to position yourself better a much more troublesome and anxiety-inducing task. A fight with these enemies can easily drain you from resources and leave you in a difficult position. The next enemy is called Novistador. Novistador is also not a Spanish word. Vista in Spanish means sight, so by pairing no and vista together and adding the dor suffix, you get Novistador. However, like I said, Novistador does not exist in the Spanish vocabulary. The Wikipedia article for this enemy says it's Spanish for the unseener. However, I doubt it because I've never heard the word unseener ever either. A much more fitting name would be Los Ocultos, which is the Spanish word for the hidden, which is much more fitting considering the main ability of these enemies. You see, the Novistador can render itself invisible, and you can only notice them because of the subtle alterations in the environment their silhouettes make, or whenever they are too close to you. They are agile, can fly and deal a lot of damage if they overwhelm you. They come in swarms, so it's advised to use a shotgun to clear the path and to deal the most damage at close range. Before going into my last enemy type, I want to mention the Colmillos, which is Spanish for fangs. These are just normal dogs that got infected with the plaga. They are encountered only in the church at nighttime, and as far as I can remember, they come in packs of 2 or more. They can launch onto Leon and bite into his face, dealing a lot of damage if you don't get them out on time. They also run around the place a lot, and it can be really difficult to get a shot on them. Unfortunately, you don't see them very often, and they are not paired with the normal ganados. They are encountered isolated. This is a wasted opportunity in my eyes, and I'm kind of disappointed that there weren't any more in the farm or the village section. Next up is the most well-known enemy in this game, and by far one of the most terrifying. I am of course talking about the Regenerador. Regenerador is Spanish for regenerator, obviously. As the name implies, even if you manage to shoot out the limbs, it will not only regenerate with time, but will also not die unless you shoot at the plaga inside of its body. At first, you encounter a normal type of Regenerador, and you have to fight it without using a special scope that lets you see the plaga on the body. When you escape the place you find it in, which by the way, is one of the most creepy areas of the game, with a lot of experiments around the place and a lot of frozen plagas, you will find that the place is swarming with these guys, and a specific one that you will encounter later called the Iron Maiden. This one is not only much more resilient, but it also has a lot of spice coming out of its body. You will encounter this one at least 2 times if I remember correctly, and both times it is extremely hard to get away from. This one is one of the most stressful and scary enemies in the game to deal with, not because they are annoying, but because it is not easy to aim with your scope when the enemy is really close. You also have not a lot of tries if you fail to shoot at the plaga inside of the body, and they always slowly approach you, or worse yet, if you shoot at the legs, they will jump towards you. One of the most terrifying aspects about the Regenerador is its moaning and gasping. It's extremely iconic and it's also terrifying. One of the highlights in my gameplay is the island prison area. In this area you will find a dumpster with a body bag crawling around in it. It is never specified what is inside of it, but you can shoot it and it will stop moving. Once you shoot, however, you will notice that the iconic gasp is coming closer, and unless you didn't notice the hallway in front of you, you won't know where it's coming from. I don't know if my version of the game was somehow bugged, but when I accidentally activated the Regenerador waiting for me in one of the cells, the combat music didn't appear, so I was about to save my progress like normal until I noticed that terrifying white figure walking towards me, only gasping and with no music. This is one of the few instances in which not having a theme for combat or a specific enemy can greatly enhance the terror in the encounter. The combat music for RE4 is great to really induce panic and a sense of action in you, but it's also much more terrifying to me when the music isn't playing and you can only hear the growls of the ganados and their conversation coming closer, while the wind blows in the background.
Follow me.
This makes me feel like I'm truly alone in this unknown area, which makes me feel isolated from the world and in turn makes me feel scared. However, that's not to say the combat music for RE4 isn't scary. Sometimes you think you cleared an entire room of enemies, only to discover that the music is still going, and you don't know where that enemy might be hiding. It could be behind you for all you know, which has happened to me, and that scared me so much that I jumped from my seat. The boss fights in this game are also pretty satisfactory and effective. While I have some gripes with some of the boss fights in the game, like the Lago boss fight, most of these boss fights prove to be pretty scary and also pretty challenging themselves. They aren't extremely hard by any means. Usually most of them follow a pretty clear pattern, which is only difficult based on how much resources like ammo you have. For example, the Gigante can only be killed by having his Plaga exposed. This Plaga can be exposed by dealing enough damage or by throwing a flash grenade. The Verdugo can only be damaged by freezing his body and then shooting at it, which can grant you a jewel to create the Salazar Crown Jewel, which is the most expensive treasure in the game. A few of the best boss fights in the game for me were the Krauser boss fight and the U3 boss fight, or IT, as Sadler refers to. These boss fights have one thing in common, which is a time limit. For the U3 boss fight, the enemy crawls around the entire place like a bug. It can come out of the vents and surprise you, or it can grab you and activate a QTE in which you need to escape. The enemy cannot be killed until you've gotten out of the platform you're in. You can only escape into the next platform by exploring your surroundings and opening up doors while avoiding him, only to then jump out of the platforms at the end, which will go into the second phase of the boss fight. Fortunately, if you've been careful with your resources, you can simply shoot flash grenades and use your shotgun or more powerful gun to get rid of the boss in the easy way, which is what I did. However, if you don't, then you've got a little arena to fight the thing in. This arena has a little place you can trap it in, and explosive barrels to damage it. It is also one of the most disgusting looking enemy designs of the game. Krauser has technically two boss fights. The first one is entirely a QTE, and even though it's a QTE, it's arguably one of the best scenes in combat sequences out of the entire game. In this sequence, he's gaining the upper hand on you, until a familiar face comes by to save you, Ada Wong. Ada Wong returns in this game and is working for Wesker to obtain a sample from the Plagas and escape the island. Krauser is working for Sadler, and he is someone we aren't familiar with, however Leon is. They are supposedly friends who went on a mission years prior to the game, and Krauser was thought to have died then. His boss fight is what you'd expect from a fellow soldier. He uses firearms in close quarters combat. However, being affected with the Plaga means Krauser is much more stronger and faster than Leon. He will be able to dodge your shots and will go into a QTE if he gets too close to you. He will also fight you with robots. Yeah, he will throw little drones or robots on the ground. They will explode when you touch them. You can also have a conversation with Krauser based on a prompt that appears sometime in the boss fight.
What is it that you fight for, comrade?
My past, I suppose.
Umbrella.
The second phase of the boss fight is much harder. This also has a time limit because he planted explosives on top of a pillar you're fighting in. He will also expose his Plaga, which is similar to the first type of Plaga you see. He will grow a giant blade on his arm and thrust and slash with it. I followed a certain strategy for this fight, which requires you to corner him and slash away with your knife until he's down. I didn't have many resources for the fight. I was low on ammo and grenades, so this was my only choice. However, that only speaks volumes for how difficult this fight is. He can not only dodge your shots, but also shield himself from them with his blade. He can also run very fast and inflict tons of damage. The best weapons for this case are obviously the most powerful choices, like sniper rifles, shotguns, or, the solution to everything, a rocket launcher. I'm gonna leave some boss fights out of this because I don't want to make the video longer than expected, but just take my word for it. The boss fights in the game are amazing and highly satisfactory to overcome, which is what helped make this game so memorable and great. Something this game also highly excels at is its environments and music. The village section is a great introduction to this game. You are isolated in a place that is very filthy, gross, and unwelcoming of you. Not only is the place extremely dangerous, but it is also disgusting and uncomfortable being around. It is filthy and there's nothing pretty about this place. Not even the sun is outside. The entire game is either a cloudy gray day or rainy nighttime. That is until the end, of course. Let's advance a little bit into the plot, shall we? After finally getting access into the church and rescuing Ashley, you will then escape and be cornered into a cabin. This is one of the best sections in the game, and the most anxiety and panic-inducing in my opinion. In here, you meet up with Luis Seda, which is a character you meet at the end of the first chapter of the game.
Leon! Small world, eh?
He is one of my favorite characters in the entire game. Not only is he fun to be around, he knows how to handle himself. Through many notes you find in the environment, you can piece out Louis' history after he explains the different enemy types you will encounter. Luis was a researcher for Los Iluminados. However, once he realized the atrocities that Sadler was doing, he decided to fight the Iluminados himself. Once he realized it was too much, he asked for help, only for Ada to answer his call for help, which is actually a ruse. Ada is not here to help, but rather to get a sample for the Plaga for Wesker. By all means, Luis is a hero. He was surrounded in an area controlled by the enemy, yet he saw the injustice and the evil that the leader was creating here and decided to fight against it. That is what makes Luis for me one of the best characters in the game. However, I was talking about the cabin sequence. In this sequence, you're of course inside a cabin with no means to escape. The enemy surrounds you, and meanwhile Ashley hides in the closet. You need to fight off the enemies that will swarm the entire place as best you can. This is one of the hardest parts of the game, and the most terrifying in my opinion. There's nothing more panic-inducing than swarms of enemies around you suddenly overwhelming you. The place is also of course really creepy, with a cabin in the middle of nowhere at nighttime and with thunder. Later on you will need to choose two paths to advance in the story, and either path is the same really. After choosing one of the two paths and fighting Vitores Mendez, you will enter the castle. In here, Leon and Ashley hope to get some shelter until their helicopter arrives. However, they are far, far from being safe inside this castle. The area is extremely different from the rest. Inside here, you will meet Ramon Salazar, the current governor of the castle and the surrounding area. Inside of this castle, you will find more and more of these plague-infected enemies. However, these aren't just some random farmers, these are dedicated cultists. They are more powerful, and they appear in greater numbers than in the village section. The castle is one of the most recognizable stages of the game after the village. Before, you had the sense that you were in an area you didn't really know for sure, and surrounded by gross, filthy environments and houses. The castle in comparison looks far more clean and deceiving. There are tons of open spaces and very high ceilings in the place, making you feel really small in comparison. There are also tight hallways and rooms, making it hard to escape from enemies. And of course, a lot of religious imagery. Not Christian though, but Plaga-esque imagery. Remember, this is a cult that worships the Plaga virus. The highlight of the castle, however, has to be the biggest room in it. In this room, as soon as you enter, you will meet swarms of enemies that can easily overwhelm you if you're not careful, or can capture Ashley. In here, there are small puzzles that need to be done to access the next room and escape the threat. And in here, there's also one of the most panic-inducing sequences in the game. In this section, you become separated from Ashley. She needs to turn around some levers that will bring up riches for you to jump to access the next area. However, enemies will start appearing both on your level and Ashley's level, so you not only need to protect yourself and manage your health, but also protect Ashley and make sure she won't get captured. This is extremely hard to do because you get swarmed with enemies on both sides, and it is highly probable that you will accidentally shoot Ashley and kill her, which means game over. In the castle, you will meet for the first time the Garrador and Novistador respectively. In here, you will also access many crazy areas like the stair and elevator area, which has you going up a set of stairs and elevator respectively, while dodging or eliminating threats in your path, like cultists with crossbows or cultists with giant sickles. In here, you will also get separated from Ashley at the start of the castle, and you will have to play as her in a very scary sequence. Of course, you have no guns, you will only get a single flashlight and whatever healing items you can carry. The puzzle in this sequence requires you to backtrack to a previous area after getting an item, and after completing a certain puzzle that is pretty fun. I won't spoil much of this section if you haven't played the game yet, because it's honestly one of the scariest in the game and has one of the greatest atmospheres. Speaking of Ashley, in the entirety of my playthrough, I haven't felt like she was annoying in the slightest, and encountered no problems. She's actually quite helpful, being able to turn her head, allowing you to notice enemies behind your back. She will also duck if you point at her, making it easy to target enemies across from her. By all means, she's not a terrible companion in the slightest. Not only is Ashley's sequence pretty scary, but the entire castle has a great atmosphere. Sure, in other circumstances, it's a pretty castle, but in the circumstances you find yourself in, it's just a hostile, scary-looking place, with many traps and enemies around the corners. You never feel like you're safe inside here. Moving on, at the end of the castle, you will find Ramon Salazar, and after beating his ass in an incredible and hectic boss fight, you will have to go to the final area of the game. After fighting Salazar, you will encounter Ada again. You will travel alongside with her on a boat to a military research island where they held Ashley. This is the most conflicting part of the game for me, because it holds great moments that are genuinely scary. However, they are slightly overshadowed by the insane action that is going on. These are not zombies, and they are actually intelligent like I said before. They can wield weapons, and you can expect that in a military research island they will wield guns. Fortunately for Leon, it seems Ganados are stupid enough to not know how to wield firearms, and only will use hand weapons like tasers or explosives, along with crossbows or usual knives. However, there seems to be a single Ganado with the ability to wield a firearm. Here comes JJ, or Gatling Man Ganado. This is a large soldier Ganado which wields a giant minigun. You will find him at least 2 or 3 times, and most of the times he is accompanied by many other Ganados. However, he's not entirely hard to eliminate. He just has a lot of endurance and can deal lots of damage if you're not careful. It's easy to avoid and dodge his shots, and he has a brief period where he reloads, which gives you enough time to unload all of your shots into him and eliminate him. This island also holds a very powerful atmosphere. Now you're not only alone, you're also much farther away from land, which really spikes up the feeling of being isolated. Sure, you know Ada is in the island with you, but you obviously cannot rely entirely on her. This is where the game starts to shift more, however. Even inside this military research island, there are many moments that are greatly unsettling. In here is where you will meet the Regenerators, and even the Iron Maidens. The underground laboratory is one of the most unsettling and suspenseful areas in the entire game. Walking throughout the facility also proves to be slightly unsettling. At this point, it's very likely you will have at least many upgrades in your weapons, or you may have many weapons on you, like an improved handgun, like the Red 9, which is my favorite gun, at least one type of shotgun, a sniper rifle, a TMP, and or a revolver. On my first playthrough, once I was done with the Regenerators, I decided to just use a handgun and a shotgun. Even with only 2 weapons, I didn't really have much of a tough time going through these advanced areas. I did, however, find myself very short on ammo for both my handgun and shotgun, something that proved very scary knowing full well the situation I was in. Like I said, before this area is where the craziness of the game really spikes up, with intense action sequences like one of your government buddies coming to help you with his helicopter, helping you get through many areas that are full of enemies with crossbows, maces, and tasers. However, this section is short-lasted, as he does unfortunately get shot down with a rocket launcher and dies. The fear factor in these areas comes more from the feeling of being really overwhelmed by what is going on, not knowing exactly where to go, which can be more frustrating than scary, and potentially running out of ammo when dealing with tough enemies. The atmosphere of these areas are, if isolated, pretty scary. The environment is really dark, with many research equipment around that seems almost abandoned, and the nighttime cloudy sky along with the water surrounding the island makes for a landscape that makes you feel truly isolated from the world and kind of scared. Along with that are the enemies that, yes, look pretty ridiculous with the armor and all, but by being surrounded by enemies, you also feel like you are threatened in some way. You don't really know the place you are exploring, even with a map, and just around the corner could be an enemy expecting you, or a regenerator waiting to kill you. This is what I mean when I say that this is a pretty conflicting area, because the amount of craziness and action going around highly contrasts these more quiet, suspenseful moments inside of the facility itself. After finally getting to Ashley one more time, it is time to escape. However, Ada also has been captured, and you need to fight one more time. This time, Sadler himself will fight you. Sadler transforms into a giant monster, and the fight begins. This is, sadly, not the most challenging fight in the game, and if you know what you're doing, you need only to lure him into an explosive or crane to get the fight over with. You can also get this fight over with almost instantly by carrying a single rocket launcher, aiming it directly into the eye as Sadler falls to the ground after being hit with a crane. This will activate the cutscene where Ada throws you her personalized rocket launcher, just like she did back then, and after shooting this once, the game will be over and everyone's happy. Or so you would expect, because Ada demands Leon to give her the sample from the Plaga at gunpoint, which he does. After this, Ada sets the island to explode, giving Leon her keys for a jet ski so he can escape alongside Ashley. A pretty reckless move considering she only gives you 3 minutes, but it's fine, I guess. It's enough time for you to escape, and the jet ski sequence is pretty short, although you could crash if you're not careful. And with that, the game ends, the island explodes and you escape on a jet ski with Ashley. Not a revolutionary plot by any means, but I guess it works. So then, having finished Resident Evil 4 recently twice in preparation for this video, why exactly does this game work? Why exactly is it considered to be one of the greatest video games ever? Definitely not because of its story. Just like any other Resident Evil game, it is either entirely character driven or it is not the greatest story out there. So then is it the gameplay? That is the most likely answer. Resident Evil 4 was developed with a more action focus to sell more copies and to change things up from the usual survival horror formula. It implemented an over-the-shoulder perspective and is said to have pioneered it. This game is definitely unsettling and suspenseful. It has many areas that make the player feel very isolated and threatened by the many enemies in the surrounding area. But not only does the atmosphere do the job, the enemies are also pretty scary themselves, whether it's a normal looking farmer, a plaga, or a soldier. It's undeniable that most of these enemies will get a pretty good scare out of you, and in the best case scenario, make you remember them just based on how horrifying they are, just like the regenerators. The areas in the game, while extremely linear and have nearly no challenging puzzles, are pretty unsettling to be in, and pretty scary to just walk without knowing where the enemies might be. The linear structure was definitely pretty hard to get used to if you're a previous Resident Evil fan. However, it isn't that bad once you get used to it. It's just disappointing that there's not more to the areas and puzzles. I didn't add this part into the script because it was already getting extremely long, but the music also helps. The save room and the typewriter themes are extremely memorable in the game, just like the battle music for normal Ganados outside of boss fights or special enemies. In general, the entire sound department is great. The sound effects of the briefcase of RE4 is arguably the most iconic SFX of any video game. Even shooting your gun is a sound you can immediately recognize, which is something that is very hard to do. And yet, most of the gaming community can easily recognize the game by its sound effects alone. The music, or in some cases lack thereof, also helps enhance the eerie and unsettling feelings of some areas, when you can only hear your footsteps, distant enemies, and the sound of the wind blowing. Sometimes this is all you need to create an eerie and suspenseful atmosphere to really unsettle the player. The combat system is fun. It rewards the player by overcoming tough enemies with pesetas or resources, and it rewards thinking on your feet and saving the resources you have for later fights which may need them. I am entirely against the upgrade and weapon system. In my opinion, it takes away a lot of the main aspect of a survival horror game, which is about feeling like you are surviving the environment, not actively trying to fight it. However, if you look at it from a shooter perspective, it's effective and rewarding. What makes the weapon system work is how the game locks certain weapons from the player until you meet a tough enemy that requires specific upgrades or a specific weapon to defeat, which makes it feel more earned and more satisfying to buy a new weapon or upgrade. The game is also extremely memorable and has a lot of replay value, which greatly enhances the experience. On top of that, you also have 2 extra game modes, Mercenaries and Assignment Ada. The other versions have yet another extra game mode called Separate Ways, which is Ada's perspective of the whole story. Mercenaries puts you in different stages that surprisingly are pretty appealing and has you fight endless hordes of Ganados coming at you until the timer stops. The entire objective is to kill the most Ganados and gain the higher score possible to unlock more characters. In this game mode, you start by playing as Leon and unlock other characters as you get higher scores. On Assignment Ada, you play as Ada in the Military Research Island, with your objective being securing Plaga samples. These game modes add to the experience and are extremely fun to play once you finish the game. You will also unlock Professional mode, which is essentially hard mode, which is also fun and challenging to play, and adds another layer to the survival horror aspect by having tougher enemies and demanding the player to be more thoughtful of its resources. Resident Evil 4 offers a lot both for fans of the series and for newcomers. I left this out of the script, but in contrast to the rookie police officer of Raccoon City, RE4 Leon seems like a different person entirely, now working for the government and being extra cocky even against the toughest of enemies, and overall being more confident of himself and his abilities. We never see Leon get directly grossed out or scared by things. That's mostly left to the player to experience. The game also offers some sweet moments between Ada and Leon, which is greatly appreciated if you played Resident Evil 2. Just to quickly summarize and end the video here, while the story isn't one of the best in video games, it is the gameplay, the characters, enemies, and atmosphere that absolutely makes the entire experience one of the most memorable in video games. On top of that, it has amazing replay value, and the game is just fun. With the PC port, there is amazing potential for mods, which are still being made to this day, and the game has so many re-releases that you can get it on virtually any console out there. The game is still being praised to this day as one of the best video games ever made, and one of the best of its time. And while it's definitely not a game for everybody, the way this game saved the franchise and the amount of fans it had even at the time of the release does not lie. The game is truly defined by the words classic and timeless. The way this game popularized an entire genre and saved Resident Evil from being discontinued by tweaking the formula of the old games into its own thing truly is what I personally think makes Resident Evil 4 work.